I want to show you what might be the craziest photo of an American bomber ever taken. You see, everybody already knows that fighter pilots have all the fun, and that's a big part of why bomber pilots always say, let fighter pilots make movies, while bomber pilots make history. It may be genuinely cool to hot rod around in a fighter jet, but when it comes to having an impact on the battlefield, there are few, if any, platforms in all of, well, ever that can match the firepower of America's heavy payload strategic bombers. And among Uncle Sam's three classes of in-service bomber, there are none with as much history, time in the air, or broad capabilities as the B-52 Stratofortress. This absolutely massive bomber has a 185-foot wingspan, meaning if you were to turn it on its side, it would be taller than a 13-story building. It's powered by 8 massive Pratt & Whitney TF-33 turbofan engines that each produce almost as much thrust as an F-16 without its afterburner engaged, giving the B-52 an astonishing 136,000 pounds of thrust. That's as much as 2 SR-71 Blackbirds. And inside its sprawling weapons bay, you can carry a whopping 70,000 pounds of ordnance. That means you would need 4 B-29 Superfortresses to match the payload of a single B-52. And on top of all that, it could beat the C-130, even the A-10 Warthog in a drag race while carrying all that hate. The B-52's been flying for more than 71 years now. In fact, it entered service 2 years before the Air Force Reserve's last P-51 Mustangs, by then known as F-51s, were finally retired. But despite all that history, the B-52 is still going strong as among America's most practical and cost-efficient platforms, not just for bombing operations, but for a wide variety of missions, including testing the most advanced hypersonic missiles on the planet. And if nuclear war were to break out, it would be up to the B-52 to deploy AGM-86 nuclear-tipped air-launched cruise missiles at adversary targets from thousands of miles out. But don't let all that serious business fool you, because B-52 pilots definitely still know how to have a good time. And we got a peek of that in 1990, when American Forrestal-class supercarriers were operating in the Persian Gulf. According to the story that goes along with these photos, sailors aboard the USS Ranger, which was a Forrestal-class supercarrier that also happened to be the first aircraft carrier U-2 spy planes ever operated off of, were sailing through the Persian Gulf when they got a call from a pair of Guam-based B-52s that were flying about 5 miles out. In a bit of inter-service camaraderie, they requested permission to conduct a carrier flyby with their bombers. And the carrier command deck approved, but then radioed back that at this distance they should be able to see them, and so far they have no visual. And according to the story, the B-52 pilots responded, "Look down." And it was then that the sailors on the Ranger realized that the B-52s were approaching at wave-top height. They were flying so low that their 8 massive TF-33 turbofan engines were actually spitting up trails of water behind them. The sailors scrambled to try to take photos, but most of them couldn't get there in time. So the B-52 flight crews radioed in and asked if they wanted them to do it again. And the answer was definitely an enthusiastic yes. And it was on that second pass that most of these pictures were taken. Now, I can't tell you exactly how far above the surface of the water this B-52 is in this photograph, but I can tell you that the flight deck of a Forrestal-class aircraft carrier usually sits about 70 feet above the waterline. And in this image, the tail of the B-52 is lower than that, meaning the underside of the bomber in this picture may be as low as just 20 or 30 feet up. Now, despite how insane this looks, and, well, it's important to note that B-52 pilots trained hard for this sort of low-altitude flight. Often not quite this low, but certainly lower than you might expect. You see, before stealth became the primary means of bomber survivability inside contested airspace, B-52 flight crews would train to fly below the radar deck. And that meant flying into enemy airspace at extremely low altitude, usually between 100 and 200 feet at most, using terrain-following radar to help make sure you didn't fly into a mountain or, at that altitude, just a fairly tall hill. So these rare glimpses we got of B-52s skimming the wavetops of the Persian Gulf certainly look crazy to us and to the sailors on board the USS Ranger. But to the highly trained crew on board that bomber, Probably just felt like another Wednesday.